You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
Folks, welcome back to the Shoe In Show, the Footwear Industries Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a great show. All our shows are great, but this one's going to be really fascinating as we dig into sustainability ahead of what's coming up, Matt, is Earth Day.
Earth Day, love
crazy.
It. Love this Earth we're on.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I'm already, we're also about 6 months to the holiday starting. So I hope you got your Christmas list going way early this year because the supply chains are still an issue. So
this is true.
Just a heads up to everybody, start shopping now if you want to get something for your
Another
kid.
Polk service announcement right there.
You may not know what they want this far in advance, but you can tell them. That's kind of what I try to do. So, we'll see about that. But so we're hitting April, which sounds crazy because this year's already flying by. But as we hit into April and we hit into Earth Day, our industry's really in this transformation.
Right.
And it's really interesting. There's a lot of positive things. There's a lot of challenges that are taking place. And Matt, you and I have talked, a lot about where we are as an industry. And I think the industry is doing really well about replacing or switching out materials for our product, right? But I think the bigger challenge that we see now is this idea of sustainable wisdom.
Right.
And I think it behooves us to kind of bring on some folks that actually are doing the actual development of these materials, these new plant-based materials and new innovative materials that reduce our impact on our planet and I think we'll talk about it today, but can actually have a positive impact in different ways. So who do we have today, Matt? What you got?
Yeah, we have some wise, sustainable sages.
Here we go.
This is like wisdom. We'll have a wisdom discussion. That's Alan, Lugo, and Stephen Taylor of the Natural Fiber Welding Company, NFW for short. Alan and Stephen, welcome to the Shoe In Show. We're super excited to have you on, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt and Andy, it's great to be here.
Yeah, of course. So let's talk plastics, right? Plastics are in all things footwear. Yeah. Plastics are in everything, right? And you guys have a unique take on the ways in which our industry should be thinking about plastics. So wisdom lesson number one, what should we be doing about plastics?
Yeah, well, thanks, Matt. I mean, I think our motto as a company is plants, not plastics. I would say in a way we're basically a company that's out there to try to displace plastics, especially in the footwear and other industries. And one of the little anecdotes that I kind of tell is like plastic is an amazing material, right? Like it's very, I would say, almost naive to say like, well, there should be no plastic in the world because there's so many sort of like life-saving, life-changing sort of products, discoveries, technologies, medical equipment, all these things that basically require plastic to exist. And we need those, right? But what we're kind of trying to address is this proliferation, this over-dependency, this overabundance of plastic in our world is just causing all kinds of other problems while not necessarily, solving any real big major issues. And so what we talk about too a lot of times is to say like, okay, wait a minute, let's take a step back and understand why and how we've gotten here for the most part from a product standpoint. And it isn't because plastic is the cheapest. I mean, if you go all the way back to where we get plastic from, we got to pull crude oil from the ground. We got to refine it. We got to do all these things that's a big process to make a fork, right? And it's not always because it's the highest performing material either. Like that plastic fork isn't better than your stainless steel fork. Everybody knows that. The reason why it's so ubiquitous in our world is because of plastic's ease to be molded and shaped into any form, by any industry. And that's really its sort of its superpower. And that's the reason why it is sort of taken over for a lot of natural materials. Natural materials generally have had an issue being molded and shaped. But that is what our technologies do. Our fiber welding technology, our Mirum product is really giving us the power to mold and shape these natural materials to be competitive with synthetics.
I think that's fascinating the way you think about that, because I think we do have this thing where it's all or nothing, right? It's like we want to zero out plastic, and it's like, okay, number one, for shoes, for performance, right? Like, do you just want the shoe to fall apart? Like, 5 steps in, and I know Alan, formerly of Wolverine Worldwide, and did a lot of work on product development there and with the sustainability teams there. So his expertise is really interesting in this space, because it is about that performance that he's just talking about there. It's like, we do want to transition away from those things, but how do we do that logically and thoughtfully? And every time I think of natural fiber welding, I think of blowtorches. I don't know why. I'm not sure if you guys have any blowtorches at your headquarters. Maybe you should have some blowtorches, even if for like creme brulee or something like that. But but
yeah, I'm sure there is some. I mean, we do have a great team of fabricators that make special things when we need special things. I'm sure they have something like that.
Maybe talk. Yeah, I am interested, before we get even further in this debate, is for natural fiber welding, for folks that don't know, maybe give us a quick profile of the company, and you talked a little bit about those materials, and I think we can get into that too. But what is the company, and when was it started, and who are some folks that you work with?
Yeah, so Natural Fiber Welding is we're a startup company. We've been around. I think we're going on our 6th or 7th year now, but we're really hitting a time of growth right now. But again, we're all founded on this motto of all natural materials, right. And the company's name, Natural Fiber Welding, was sort of our initial technology. Luke Averalls is our CEO. He invented this technology. About the fiber welding is a really descriptive way to describe it. We can take short staple length fibers, like a lot of the work we're doing right now is on cotton, and in cotton yarn typically is held together by these short staple fibers, just held together by friction as it's spun. But what we do, and not to get too technical, is if you think about a visual of taking those fibers and sort of welding them together and creating something that's more similar to a filament type yarn than a short staple yarn. And then you get these improved, physical attributes of the yarn. It becomes stronger. We can change its moisture wicking or water absorption properties. Abrasion can be changed. And it isn't just like you push a button and the yarn becomes welded and it's like sort of binary. There's literally millions of ways we can weld this yarn by welding it on the outside, but not in the inside, or on the inside and not in the outside, and all these different variations. So that's where natural fiber welding comes from. And we have a yarn technology, using that, called Claris. And then our other product on sort of like on the other side of the building is Mirum. And that's a material that is, and we're talking about FDRA here. It's a material that's really meant for shoe uppers. And, one of the challenges, and Andy, I think you'll be and Matt, very familiar with this topic, is, we try to find ways to describe Mirum and make people understand what it is and why it's great, without using the word leather, because we are very respectful of the leather industry, and our material isn't leather. And we're not trying to replace leather necessarily. We're trying to replace plastics. And so we really try to let people know that Mirum is a new category of material. It's a natural material, but it isn't leather. And because it's natural, it's definitely not what, we even in duty rates, Andy, right? It's just called synthetic. Like this material isn't synthetic, right? But it isn't leather. So that's a whole nother topic we got to go down, Andy, is how do we figure out a special duty rate for these materials that are good for people, good for the planet, but don't fall into either of those two categories. But we're innovating in those spaces, and we have plenty of other products. And Andy, I think, I may have talked to you about this. We have yarn that can be used for knit uppers or for canvas or for textiles on the Claris side with fiber welding. We have Mirum that obviously can be used in uppers, small leather goods, handbags, automotive interiors, all these things. But every other part of the shoe, we have technologies in the pipeline that are coming to be able to make that 100% all natural shoe. You think about foams and rubber and molded counterpieces and reinforcements, and all of these things we fully intend to address in the near future.
Yeah. And, I think thinking about all that change, I think is what brands are dealing with right now, is trying to make sense of how to use it properly and work with partners like you to figure out what the future is. And we've got these big these big terms we're talking about now around circularity too. And I want to bring Steven in because I know he's doing a lot of the technical work on a lot of this stuff. And I know you guys are talking about this more and more about what circularity is. How do you think about it for footwear in particular? I think it's almost like that term sustainability. It's such a large loaded term. We almost have to like break it down a little bit and explain it so that people kind of understand what we're talking about. The other day I sent out an email about recycling, footwear recycling, and I was just trying to do a map of it. And then people started emailing me about refurbishment issues. Even within what people think of recycling footwear, the definition for a lot of people, it bleeds into other things. And so what you guys are working on is fascinating in terms of the circularity and what it means for, there's these terms too around like biodegradable. Do we need to be thinking in those terms? So Stephen, when you're focusing on this and you're doing some of the technical stuff, how do you think about these things and how do you develop these materials to get us towards circularity, get us off the plastics and actually get us to kind of a new epoch in footwear and apparel?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so. My background is in soil science. I got a degree in soil science from Washington State University, and so I'm used to, and my training is in thinking about how nature cycles nutrients and things in the soil environment, with plants and in agriculture. So when I was contacted by NFW, and Alan and I had connected and talked about things before, NFW, even when he was at Wolverine. So just the fact that NFW had the foresight to bring on a soil scientist, I think to me shows where NFW's minds are and what we're trying to think when we think of circularity.
Yeah.
So for me, circularity, there's a lot of examples in nature of what circular means. Nature is really good at cycling through nutrients. The time scales are a little bit different than what we think of when we think of circularity. When we think of circular, we think of a few months. But really, nature is really good at cycling ingredients in long terms. If you think of a tree falling and degrading over time, that tree is getting reused and recycled, and maybe not turned into another tree yet, but it's certainly contributing into that environment. But I think a lot of the industry definitions of circularity are kind of just like making little circles, and we're trying to reuse materials as often as we can. But if we zoom out a little bit, in the end, it's still not very circular. It's kind of just a few little loops. And then there's always an end of life at some point, and usually that's in the landfill. So at NFW, we're trying to kind of zoom out a little bit and take a really big picture idea of what circularity means. So if we're starting from all natural materials, and if we draw a really hard line and say, we're not going to put any ingredients in here into our materials that are going to not be able to cycle through in nature. If we've developed these technologies to be able to form and mold these materials into something that's a durable good that's going to last through, have a good productive life cycle, and that is easily recyclable. So we can, once, this material does have an end of life, we can recycle it and reuse it and mold it into something else. But we also recognize that eventually there's going to be an end of life. So if we've started from a good place, we can end in a good place and show that material, if and when it enters the environment, like a soil environment, it's going to do no harm in the time it takes for that material to degrade, whether that's 6 months or whether that's 2-3 years. In that time, it's not going to do any harm. We use the term bioneutral a lot at NFW, but really we're just trying to communicate that these materials can be recirculated into nature, and in that time they're neutral. It's not going to do any harm, just as when like a tree gets cycled and recirculated back into nature.
That's really interesting, Stephen, because Andy and I have been talking about the ways in which, because sustainability is such a broad term, as Andy just mentioned, people are just declaring their own narratives and writing their own stories and then marketing around that. And then all of it's really cool stuff, right? But to your point, a lot of it's just delaying the inevitable. It's just delaying those unnatural materials from finding their way to landfill. And we want to kind of an above all approach, don't get me wrong, because we're making incremental progress. But at the same time, it sounds like what you guys are doing is kind of ceasing the current chase for biodegradable, if you will, and starting at the process. So whether it hits landfill the next day after it's at the retail store or 25 years from now, it won't have a negative impact on the environment. Is that kind of the layman's way of viewing what soil scientists just explained to us about biodegradable materials?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, I think that we're not, I guess the goal is we need to put in infrastructure so that landfill is not its end of life through take back programs or, any of the other circular infrastructure that we're trying to put together. But I think, one of the things that we are always talking about, we're trying to make durable goods. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about biodegradability, kind of all of the industry standards for biodegradability are trying to show that it'll biodegrade in a period time scale of like a few months. But really, we're trying to build shoes. We're going to build shoes out of this mirror, and people are going to be running around in the sand, walking in the ocean, crossing rivers, and they're going to put their sweaty, hot feet inside that shoe. We don't want that thing to start biodegrading in a period of a few months. We want that to be durable. So because of that, we're trying to think of biodegradability in kind of a larger time scale.
Yeah. We always mention when we talk to customers or people like you, Andy, or the other groups and conferences, is your material biodegradable is a question we get asked all the time.
Yeah.
And it's important. Like the immediate next question that sometimes I ask is, well, are you talking about in the product marketing sense, or are you talking scientifically? Right? Because I say product marketing, there's the green guides, there's all these rules that say, well, your product has to go through a standard waste stream that's available to the majority of consumers in that market, and it has to break down by 90% in 90 days. So almost nothing fits that, right? I mean, cornstarch forks and things like that, which Stephen has tested and looked at, and it's those things are meant to fit that sort of in that boundary. But then on the other side, you could say, well, glass is biodegradable. You can look it up. It just takes 5 million years to biodegrade. And like Stephen said, if you just take a 2x4 that's 100% cellulose and put it out in the field, that thing's not going to biodegrade anytime soon. And that's what led us to create this sort of discussion around bio-neutrality. What you really want is materials that are bio-neutral, because then you could also have things that will biodegrade quickly but leave toxins in the soil. So it's stepping out, taking a step back and understand what are we really talking about. And then, we live by this mantra of always thinking about where things come from and where they go to. And if I think about my time in the footwear industry, even the majority of my time in the footwear industry, the scope of that question was basically it comes from this material supplier and it goes to a consumer. And that's the bookends of that train of thought. And it's no, is your material pumped as crude oil out of the ground and then goes to a landfill? And for the majority of all shoes and sportswear, that is the case. And that's what we're trying to sort of make sure people understand and find a solution to that. And so it's not just, okay, it comes through and recycle it. We recycle the plastic once or twice, but it's still being pulled as oil from the ground, and it's still going into a landfill and shedding microfibers and who knows doing what to our water systems and all this. And so when we talk about circularity, it's taking that all into account. And that's why we have to hire a Stephen as a soil scientist. Yeah. And that's why we hire we got a guy on our team named Griffin. His title's a mouthful: raw materials strategy and supplier development specialist. And so that's taking into account not only we know we work with all natural materials, but what is the best way to source those materials? What is the best way to work with the local community? And I would say we will always have work to do there, because there's always ways that you can, work in your supply chain that is the best way for the people on that end, right? That we never see, that the people that buy the shoes never see, never know about. And so when you balance those two things out, it really gives you the context of how different the approach is than the incumbent materials.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this podcast right now and you need to hit pause and think about this and then rewind it, because I think you should, because this is one of the first conversations we've had on biodegradability, really being thoughtful about it. And I would say my mindset changes every week about new ideas, and I'm trying to roll through to understand circularity and understand things. And I think you wouldn't believe the number of voicemails we get in our offices from consumers complaining about their product. And I can just imagine someone saying my footwear just biodegraded on my foot. I need a new thing. So I can imagine the customer service issues if you don't get it right and it's not durable. But I think we've talked for a long time about the industry getting more engineers and scientists involved to solve these challenges. So I think it's super cool that we can talk to somebody like Steven who actually focuses on that specifically and thinks about that as part of the puzzle that we're trying to solve. Because I do think, we see more and more legislation across the globe popping up and more regulations popping up around extended producer responsibility. And this idea that you can't just make a product, sell a product and not measure the impact and know what's happening with it, right? There's more responsibility that we have to have. We calculate there is every single year thrown into the landfill just in the United States, 427 million this is a big number, 427.5 million pairs of shoes every single year. And I think that's conservative, actually. I think there's probably more that do get thrown in. And it is about, I had a conversation this week with one of our members about how we rethink circularity and think about the impact, right? Like what if we, there's some shoes that we can think about recycling and reusing and figuring out materials. And there's some shoes like my kids' shoes that are, they trash them. And what do you do with those? And some of the materials can't be recycled right now. There's just no infrastructure, no technology. But it would be great that if I did put it into the landfill and I did have to throw it out, that it is neutral, that it is not going to have an impact. And even if it degrades over 5 years, I know that it will break down and not have a soil negative impact. And that's okay. And I think companies need to think that way too, right? We're not even thinking in those terms of, we think biodegradability 90-day standard. And maybe some people don't even know that's 90 days, right? They're just talking about biodegradability because we're just talking about it. But I think this idea of neutrality is fascinating, and the conversation is so important to focus on that for footwear, to think more strategically about the materials and the construction too. And then Alan, I know you worked a lot on the material side of Wolverine, and obviously at where you're at now, but also just how we construct the footwear, I think fundamentally has to change if we're thinking about circularity and adhesives and glues and all that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things where, I would say, if you want to make an all natural shoe or a shoe that's sort of friendly to the environment at its end of life, the challenge is usually thread and adhesives, right? You can make a shoe out of cotton and use natural rubber or something on the sole, but the thread and the adhesives is the real challenge. I mean, that's what's really holding everything together. That's the thing where really we're relying upon synthetics the most. And so, I would say those things are in our pipeline as well, mostly because we know our technologies can help there. But there's other work by other people being done there too, right? And anything that helps is good. But Andy, I think you were talking a little bit too about, the term circularity. It was still, but even 2 years ago, it was we got to define the term sustainability. Right. And it's true, right? We do. Everybody can't just throw these terms around, right? But even now it's getting to that point with circularity too. So, kids' shoes are a great example where it's sometimes they trash them and sometimes they hardly wear them, right? You get soup to nuts with kids' shoes. So it is really great to have hand-me-downs and reuse them and swap with your neighbors about kids' shoes. And I see some cases where people, companies, whatever, are doing models like that and saying, well, this is our circularity solution. And that's where I say, that's when you got to zoom out and say, no, that's extending the life of a product. That shoe was made and it probably can last X amount of years, and it needs to last X amount of years. Just because a kid bought it and wore it for 3 months and never wore it again, when you give it to somebody else so it can live its full life, that's not circularity. That thing was already meant to last that long, and it already came from petroleum, and it's still going to the landfill. So it isn't circularity. It's just extending the life of the product, which is good, right? That's that needs to be done. That's the low hanging fruit. Right. Let's not be throwing stuff away that still has life left in it, because we use so many materials and resources to create it. It needs to extend and live its full life. But let's not confuse that with a circular model.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, Alan, with coming at it like you guys are, because you have a really innovative solution, but you don't want to be out there kind of dogging kind of these, baby steps people are taking, right? So you're trying to lead people in a way that shows the innovative side and the opportunity that's there, while not totally criticizing what they're doing. But let's face it, in kids' shoes alone, there's so much plastic, right? That is like the battlefield for which you need to be operating on as a company. NFW is in the kids' shoe space, because there's so many plastics are so prevalent, and because of the short life cycle of shoes for kids. So how do you kind of balance? Do you guys structure your approach in a way that focuses on just one area or one segment of the industry, or kids' shoes, or these type, or high performance, or are you just kind of, we're going to make this material as much as we can get it out there into the footwear landscape, if you will? That's what our goal is.
Yeah, I think we're maturing there, and that's where we're evolving to. So again, we're a young company. We're growing very fast, bringing on amazing, talented people. It's one of the things I like working about here the most. And so, maybe initially when we worked on Mirum and started bringing Mirum out, I would say like here's a material, and it's good for some things and not good for others, and whoever can use it, great, right? And I think as we keep going, and as we build R&D, as we build development, now we are starting to sort of dial it in and say, okay, for automotive, it's going to need these specific requirements that are maybe things that aren't needed in handbags or fashion or upholstery. And footwear is its own beast, right? It needs certain things along in terms of, tear strength and abrasion, and it, being able to be adhered to, and all these things. So yeah, we are starting to build it out more and understand now more that like it isn't a one size fits all material. It may have started that way, and you can use it for many things, but our goal, right, is to make sure that we're giving specific solutions to each of these industries. And we always say too, like, it's part of the startup mentality, but we don't put the product out there and say, here it is, it's done, take it or leave it. It's continual work to make it better. Not only like the material specifications and physical performance, but even supply chain. Like, how can we do that better? How can we make the performance better? And kind of like a software upgrade, right? Version 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. Okay, now we're at version 2.0. The material work will continue to evolve and get better as we learn and understand more. And that's what we like. We again, it's one of these things where like I use things as examples, but I try to be very careful not to like make it sound like we're saying we're putting anybody down, because like you said, the baby steps, the incremental improvements, we need all of that. But we don't have one hero material, right? Like, fruit leather and vegetable leather. And because of that, all of the natural world are things we're potentially looking to say, hey, can this improve this aspect of our material? Can this make it more processable? Can this reduce the cost? So there's a multitude of natural materials in our toolbox. And there's some that we haven't even had a chance to work with yet, right? And we use a bullet point in some of our presentations where we say, did you know, I think it was the Missouri Botanical Gardens discovered like 200 new species of plants last year. And we say like, that's one of those factoids, like, oh, it's nice, but who cares? Say, well, we care, because one of those new plants might have this great, feature that when we mix it with some of our materials and our scientists work with it and they realize it unlocks something. It's a new ingredient that we can take in and use. And it's really easy to say like, well, yeah, if we just use this one synthetic ingredient and we use 2% of it, our tear strength would go through the roof. Well, yeah, but that's not what we do as a company. That's throwing our entire mantra and what we're trying to solve for out the window, because it kills the true circularity story. So I think that really helps to put it in context of like why we're doing what we're doing and how it's different, and how it can evolve with new materials, right? And there's companies out there that are working with natural materials and using them for certain things. And sometimes we tap into them and make those connections and find out, this could be good for our material. And it's really cool because I think there's a lot of things out there that we sort of can discover where it's like people think it's this waste product or this byproduct of some agricultural industry or whatever. Like, well, this is just trash. Like, nobody wants this. And it's like, well, we want it because we can't use the standard product that everybody uses. Like, that stuff's all off the table for us. So this little thing over here that you think has no value might have huge value to us, right? And then if we're taking it as a waste product and all these, like, it just continues to sort of multiply on why it is good for people and planet.
It sounds like American Pickers, where you guys go out antiquing for materials, trying to find different things. You got Steven sitting there playing in the soil, and Alan's going out antiquing for the materials to figure out what's happening.
Yeah. Well, it's not me. There's other people doing that, much smarter than me. But
in the botanical gardens in every city. Exactly. There's so many opportunities.
This conversation's great because we need more of this. And I was just in my mind thinking the first time Alan and I got together face to face, because we had a ton of calls, and first time we got together face to face was our first working group meeting on sustainability right before the pandemic hit. So this is like February 2020, I think. And the conversation then was so elementary to where it is now in our industry. So it's very positive, but this conversation has to keep going because we've moved in some areas, we've progressed, and we're still stuck in our own circular conversations, I'd say, still around just trying to figure out the easy solution to things. And I think there is no easy solution. And there's so many product categories for a lot of these companies, right? Kids shoes, performance, running shoes, casual brunch shoes. And they're looking for a solution that solves all the things at one time. And I think our members are starting to realize and get into what fits for what, right? Let's make steps where we can for this category, learn what we can, spread it somewhere else. Maybe for certain types, we can be more durable and extend that life cycle. For other types, maybe not. So what do we do? Take back program, donate the shoe, keep it out longer. And then other types we want to recycle it, or we want to figure out how it could be, over time, have no impact as it sits in the landfill and what that looks like. So I think we're on the cusp of really discussing what the life cycle looks like for footwear in a different way than we did even a couple of months ago. I know my mindset is changing rapidly about all these different conversations about, again, we started at the very beginning, but it is wisdom, right? And it's a continual journey of learning new things all the time that change our calculus. And the problem with our industry is we need to have these conversations, and there's no simple solution, but you got to struggle through the topics and ideas and throw things at the wall and think through it again and recalibrate and keep, it's a continual thing. And I think there's people who really like the grind and maybe some who don't like the grind of doing that. But if we don't struggle through this stuff, we'll never find the solutions, I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're right, Andy. And it's in a metaphor that we use sometimes, and it's a common metaphor, but we think about the industry where we're at now and what the progress we're making, which is progress, and it's good to see. And I think anybody could say, well, we need to be doing more faster, right? We would want to. It's akin to iteration versus true innovation. And I think what the industry, for the most part, and there's reasons for this, right? It's hard to do. The industry is a well-oiled machine that's used to working a certain way with certain inputs. But the metaphor is, you can work on building a plane and engineering a plane that continues to fly higher and higher in the sky. It gets higher, it gets to 50,000 feet, 8,000 feet. Maybe then it gets to the edge of space, right? A lot of work goes into that. But that's fundamentally a completely different approach than if you're trying to send a rocket to Mars. And I think that's we use that to say, when we're trying to do 100% natural materials, truly 100%, that are all, non-petroleum based, actually have options at end of life, that's shooting a rocket to the moon. Upping your recycled percentage, going from 30% bio content to 35, to be honest, that's going 5,000 feet higher in the atmosphere. That's not going to get you to Mars, right? And so it's not easy, right? And our materials aren't perfect. And I'm not going to tell you swap our material out for anything in a shoe and it's going to work. It might not. But that's what we're trying to do. And that's what we want people to understand. We're fundamentally taking a different approach. And then if you can zoom out and maybe your whole line right now isn't ready to take this approach, but if you have a couple projects where you're really looking to make a difference, if you really are trying to do that Mars shot or that moon shot, take this approach, come with us on this path and this journey, because we need the brands they're with us. We need the industry with us, right? Like we're getting as much expertise as we can, but we don't make shoes, right? We're working engineering these materials. So that's kind of our call out to the industry to say, like, we need everybody's help. We know we're not perfect, but we are striving to be what we think is the most perfect model of shoe material in the industry.
The industry needs you all, right? We need innovators and critical thinkers and people who step outside of the industry and outside of the well-oiled machine. Alan, you were in the middle of it. Stepping outside of it now is critical, I think, for our industry to succeed. And my hope is that as you solve the footwear materials issue, that you can move to paper straws, because those things biodegrade in like 30 seconds upon hitting my drink. So I don't know when we're going to solve that low-hanging fruit.
That's what I told Steven. I said, those straws are good for a medium-sized soda, but they're not good for a super-sized. Like that is a dialed-in life cycle right there. That is not a shoe.
All I can think of is the Dumb and Dumber scene where he has the big gulp walking around like with the
the Slim Jims.
Yeah, Slim Jims. Like the old lady stole all his money, stole all his stuff. I think too, there's a conversation that we don't have from an external force. So first of all, I'm super glad that NFW is involved and they're active in our working group calls. And I'll tell anybody out there as a member, we do almost every single month, we do a call, and it may be on packaging, it may be on bio, it may be on recycling, it may be just some aspect of this. And it's all about this conversation and helping people think a little more critically about what's happening. Like I tell people, sometimes the solution is in the conversation, and thinking just differently about your challenges and thinking through the progress of things. Please stay involved if you're out there, and you can contact me if you've never heard of our working group and what we're doing to try to bring companies together. We facilitated through that working group this great guide on shoesustainability.com, environmentally preferred material guide. And the whole idea is it's not an end-all be-all guide to tell you everything, but what we're trying to do is exactly what Alan said, is like, let's align the industry around certain thresholds of materials that we know can be bio or recycled or better materials for the environment than what we're doing now. And if we can do that together and assure folks like NFW that we're going in that direction, they can put more capital towards innovation because they know the demand will be there to develop those products for us. But we've got to work together as a community of footwear people to get there. My last thought before we wrap up is, again, it's kind of external and it sounds a little bit weird probably to footwear people. My largest concern going forward, as we see war in Eastern Europe, we see massive competition for raw materials around the world now between the US, Russia, China, et cetera, is just the commodity challenges that we're going to have around oil and around other materials that we have. We have to develop new types of materials that we can use if we see commodity challenges coming. And I think with oil prices the way they are right now, I'm not sure they're going to go down anytime soon. It obviously depends on demand and supply and all that. But I think, we need to be thinking strategically about our supply chains and our materials in ways that we don't. And that is, we have to factor in more risks and more scarcity and more challenges of commodities. And this is an opportunity where you have someone like NFW creating innovative materials that can solve some of those challenges to our, not just in terms of our environment, but in terms of we may have a real problem in the future about the materials that we use. They may not be there like they have been in the past, or if they are, they're going to cost an arm and a leg in ways we don't anticipate. So I just want to throw that out there. Again, it may be strange to some people to hear that, but I just want to put it on the map that I have large concerns going forward about this new world that's being created out of COVID and out of this war, that we don't anticipate how commodities and materials are going to shift and go around. So,
well, Andy, I mentioned about supply chain strategy on our side, and that's one of the things that we always talk about too, is scale. Yeah. And not just to say, oh, can we scale and make 1 million square feet, that kind of thing. Like that's a scale that requires machinery, but can the raw material inputs scale if the whole industry does want to jump on this solution? And I think that's the thing that we always ask customers to think of as well, when there's a lot of cool things out there that are very promising, but it takes a few, and I'm not the expert, I learn from a lot of experts, to step back and say, well, wait a minute, how can this type of a solution scale to address the entire industry without requiring so many resources, so many inputs, so many new machines. I mean, and that's one of the things, our technologies are pretty lean, really. And so some of these things out there are really cool, but, can they actually scale to do what the industry needs them to do? And that's one of the areas that we're dialed in on all the time to make sure that that's a possible solution and not something that can only work for 2% of the industry. And then you max out, the supply of a particular ingredient, or just the unit economics fall apart at a certain scale. Right.
Yeah. Well, Alan and Steven, thanks so much for coming on today to talk to us about these things. And I'm glad we went deep. Like sometimes we're like, and on these issues, I think going down the rabbit hole is important because there's no easy solutions. And the only way to get through this and figure things out is to like really sit and look at a wall and really think through things. Right. Like it's challenging but also the innovation that we see coming out that is transforming our industry is fantastic. And we look forward to seeing what you guys come up with next and what you're working on. And I encourage folks out there, if you're listening to this and you have no idea what we're talking about, good. I'm glad you're listening. And if you need help, contact us. I encourage all the folks out there and brands, if you've never heard of NFW or you want to learn more about them, contact Alan and talk to him. You can find him on LinkedIn. If you want me to do an introduction, I'm happy to do that. But I think you have to have these conversations with these material suppliers. It's not enough just to say, oh, there's a solution, let's grab it and put it here. Like, I think we need to talk to our suppliers about why we're doing it so they can help us a lot more figure out other aspects of what we're doing and make better products and processes along the way. So don't just think of it as substitution. Think of it as addition by working with a partner to figure out, if I were a brand and I was out there and I was looking at this, I go to Alan and be like, this is my problem with this. And Alan, with his background, could probably give you a lot of value add beyond just the material about how you think about your processes. And that's how I think about it is iron sharpening iron in our industry and using all these thoughtful sages out there. And we're trying to do that too. We're trying to bring more people into the conversation with different viewpoints to facilitate that critical thought and get us to where we're going. So Alan and Steven, again, thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. The collaboration, the cross-pollination you and FDRA is doing is really awesome. And I love it and glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, and thank you guys. And folks, Shoe and Show is the podcast you're listening to, in case you didn't know what it was. You can go to shoeandshow.com. Our full catalog is on there. We've been doing this for over 5 years now. I've had really thoughtful conversations with leaders and experts. And I would say, even 5 years ago, the conversations on different aspects of our industry are still very relevant. We focus a lot, especially with our executives, on culture. And I think culture and leadership are still issues that we can all learn from. So go back in the library and find some interesting topics or speakers that you want to hear from and think a little bit differently about what you're doing and why you're doing in our industry. And I think you'll find a lot of value in that. As always, we appreciate you listening. Until next time, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.